One of the most beloved personalities in all of NFL media, Mina Kimes, has released her top 10 offenses and top 10 defenses entering the 2024 NFL season. And it's time to finally react to one of Mina's lists. Gronk, spike the like button and subscribe for more NFL reactions to rankings just like this. The top 10 offenses and the top 10 defenses in the NFL, according to ESPN's Mina Kimes. Let's see if Mina is brilliant or brutal. Does she live up to the hype? Let's discuss, guys. Gronk, spike that like button, and let's begin with the top 10 offenses in the NFL. So she ranks the San Francisco 49ers at number 1 after last season's dominant performance. And I do agree with the 49ers being at number 1. I think it's just quite simply hard to disagree, to be honest. After the 49ers were the most efficient running football team and passing football team of the last season, 2023. And in my opinion, one of the best offenses we've seen over the past decade. I really feel like, in terms of the balance, obviously Kyle Shanahan calling plays, Brock Purdy's efficiency, knowing where to go with the football, the yards after catch demons within the offense, Christian McCaffrey having one of the best running back seasons of the past few years and being an offensive player of the year. All of that in tandem, along with having an excellent left tackle, multiple receivers. The Niners, they were just a well-oiled machine, and I absolutely agree. Entering 2024, they might be even better, and I would argue that there's a possibility they could be just as good as last year. Why? Because the personnel is probably going to be better when you talk about Ricky Pearsall being added to the mix at wide receiver. A route technician, a guy that can separate from man coverage, is tough over the middle of the field. He is going to add another element and perhaps more of a spread element, adding another receiver to this mix. Maybe having more 4-receiver, 11 personnel spread type looks, right? Because now you've got to think about it. You got Jawan Jennings as well. You've got Debo. You've got Ayuk. So you've got 4 receivers that can really play at a pretty high level. And then they could always go to 11 personnel with 3 receivers on the field. Of course, they still have George Kittle. They still have Kyle Juszczyk. They have Christian McCaffrey. They have probably one of the best running back depth charts in football with Mitchell and Mason backing up McCaffrey. The offensive line is pretty much exactly the same, except they added a rookie to beef up the depth. And Brock Purdy is the main component here, a guy that is entering just his 3rd season in the NFL. In his 2nd season, he looked to really improve, and it felt like he was almost on his way to an MVP caliber season thanks to the efficiency of this offense, where Purdy wasn't like incredible individually, but they were just so good offensively that was hard to argue the production that Purdy was putting up. But in year 3, he could get better in his mind and he could get better physically. We've already seen him beef up. You see the muscle that he's put on, but on top of that, he's going to have a full offseason for the first time in his career to work with quite simply the best offensive line in football in Kyle Shanahan. The first time in his career, because last offseason, of course, he was working and coming back from a major, massive injury. So this year, Purdy could be at his best. Maybe Kittle, McCaffrey, Debo, these guys are getting a little bit up there. So maybe 1 or 2 of them do decline slightly, but Ayuk only seems to be ascending, and I do feel they're going to work that out, that situation, the contract. And Pearsall, Jawan Jennings, all the versatility here, plus the play calling. The chemistry is also light years above many of these offenses as well. So I definitely agree with Mina that the 49ers are in the conversation for the best offense in the NFL, if not the best. At number 2, the Los Angeles Rams, which is really where the list becomes slightly controversial, but she's very high on the Rams. And I went and I listened to both of these podcasts just to make sure that I didn't misunderstand anything. But with the Los Angeles Rams, I can see an avenue where they're top 3 or top 5. I've even said it in some of my videos where I was like, they might be the best offense in the NFL this year. Like, it wouldn't be crazy if that was the case. Now, I think that it's a little bit too high at number 2, just because I think that there's always the liability of Stafford and his health, his age, and him staying on the field. Cooper Kupp to me is not the same player. So that's certainly the biggest factor in me not putting them at number 2. Do I think they belong in the top 10? Yes. Thanks to Stafford when healthy, thanks to Nacua and Kupp, thanks to Williams in the backfield, an improved offensive line, thanks to Jonah Jackson. I think they low-key have one of the best guard duos in football, very solid in the interior of the offensive line. And I do think that Nacua is an excellent football player. I honestly think he's still underrated. And Stafford is still underrated to many degrees by many people, as we've seen him not even be ranked at top 100s before on this channel. But yeah, Sean McVay's an excellent play caller, all that stuff. I see it. The balance, the screens, the motion usage, all the different ways that they set up their offense for success through play action, through Stafford being able to attack all 3 levels of a defense, through Stafford's ability and experience to read defenses, to know where to go with the ball, to be able to be clutch in 2-minute situations. All those things make me believe they're a top 10 offense, but I think the lack of, let's say, secondary weapons, especially if Kupp is not the same player. Demarcus Robinson's their number 3 receiver. Tyler Higbee's coming off an injury as their tight end. Not too impressive to me. Like, the offensive line is good, but I don't think it's great. And Stafford, I do think, is going to have, a little bit of shakiness just in terms of injury. So I would say that they could argue they're in the top 5. I think you could definitely put them in the top 10. But at number 2, it feels a bit dicey and a bit bold for my liking. But hey, hot takes are accepted here. At number 3, the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs are kind of undeniable, but at the same time, last year, they were like not even a top 10 offense in the NFL, especially, in the regular season. Last year in the playoffs, they did turn it on, but let's remember that they played a extremely beat-up Buffalo Bill defense and an extremely beat-up Miami Dolphin defense, and those were by far their 2 best performances. In the AFC Championship, they had one good drive, which was great, the first drive of the game, which really put them ahead, and their defense pretty much dominated the entire game against Lamar. And then in the Super Bowl, they had one good half. Remember, the first half was pretty miserable for the Kansas City Chiefs against the 49ers. So I still don't think that their offense is likely to be top 3, but it is undeniable that with Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and now the added dimensions of potentially Marquise Brown, Xavier Worthy, and maybe Rashee Rice, I don't know how consistent he's going to be on the field, I still think they're certainly top 10, and I would argue they'll be much better than last year. But to put them in the top 3 after what we saw last year, you're basically saying that Marquise Brown is going to be a huge difference maker, that maybe Worthy as a rookie is going to be a huge dimension to the offense. Because otherwise, left tackle is really dicey for this football team. Right tackle in Jawan Taylor is still not great, in my opinion. The run game is always inconsistent, and there are guys getting older here. Travis Kelce, Joe Thuney are 2 examples of premier players that are getting older. But I could see an avenue, again, to top 5. I could see an avenue to number 1. But just based on last year, it is hard for me to project them as a top 3 offense personally. But some may disagree with that. At number 4, I definitely disagree with the Ravens. Only because I don't believe in their offensive line. And I think they have maybe above average play calling, but I don't think it's like exceptional. So I would say that Lamar is an excellent quarterback, but as we've seen in his career, he seems to kind of have one great year followed up by one good year. So I don't know if this is just going to be a trend for his entire career. You also got to talk about him staying on the field consistently as well, which is something that I mentioned with Stafford, which I would not leave out for Lamar either, which is certainly the case. But Derrick Henry has been added to the mix. I think that's a huge dimension to this offense, to be able to power run the football, which has always been an expertise of theirs. I do think they've leaned more into the passing game the last season without Greg Roman as the play caller, and they became a more diverse, I would say even play action oriented team than they were before. And they were willing, I think, to throw the ball down the field a little bit more last year. It felt like, at least on the surface. Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews are 2 awesome tight ends. I'm intrigued to see how they use both of them. Andrews, though, has been hurt the last couple of years and has not been the same player he was, in 21 or 2. I can't quite recall which season was the massive year of 1,300 yards and 100 plus catches, but he's not that same guy, but he's still excellent. One of the best red zone options, one of the best contested options. Zay Flowers, huge fan of him. I think he's going to take off in year 2 in a big way. I'm not a Rashad Bateman guy. I've experienced Nelson Aguilar firsthand. Not a huge fan of Nelson Aguilar, although he's a fine number 3 or 4 receiver. And yeah, the offensive line is shaky. I just think people are rating their line. Like Rosengarten's a rookie. I don't love their guard positions. And then Tyler Linderbaum's awesome, but Ronnie Stanley always gets injured. So for me, I feel like number 4, the Baltimore Ravens, that's just too high based on what they did last year, because it's basically looking at what they did last year. Now, they did have Mark Andrews out for a majority of the year, that sort of thing. I do like Zay Flowers. I do like Derrick Henry, but again, he's also getting older. So for me, I'd have the Ravens maybe closer to 10. I don't think they're a better offense, toe-to-toe, game for game, best over the Bengals, who are at number 10 in their own division. I think at their best, in a big game, which offense would I rather put my money on? I'd rather take the Bengals. And that's because I love their tackle duo this year with Trent and Orlando Brown. I think that they can throw the football through a spread and simplistic fashion, but it's also highly efficient when Joe Burrow is on his game. They are extremely explosive with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but they also find a great mix of screen, underneath usage, and then also a tad bit of a running game to keep defenses honest. They very much remind me of the Colts Peyton Manning offense, where it's very static. There's not a lot of motion. It's almost 2000s-esque, but it's very effective because they have matchups on the field. And I think they've improved the tight end position with Mike Gesicki, tackle position with Trent Brown and Amarius Mims. So that gives them a bit of depth on the offensive line. I think running back Chase Brown is going to be pretty good, and Zach Moss isn't bad. I also feel like they can run the ball solid enough. And the decent, Tyler Boyd's a bit overrated at this point, in my opinion, of a loss. I think that Burton and these other guys that they had last year that stepped up in roles like Irwin, I think will come through and make some plays. So I think the Bengals are probably in my top 7. I would probably remove the Ravens from that top 5. The Packers above the Lions, I think, is pretty bold as well. I would have the Lions above the Packers only because I think that their O-line is just insane. Like, the Lions' O-line just dictates every game they play in. As long as they're healthy, they bully people, and their run game is pretty much unstoppable. Like, I don't think any team can shut down the Lions' running game. It's such a good running game, thanks to their offensive line, that it just opens everything else up. Sam Laporta is on his way to becoming an elite tight end. Jahmyr Gibbs, I think, will be an elite explosive option out of the backfield this year. I like David Montgomery. Amon-Ra is one of the best, if not the best, slot receiver in football. And I do think Jameson Williams will add a spark on the outside with the vertical game to this offense. Jared Goff, I think, is also a little bit disrespected at times as a passer. I think he makes a lot of throws at the intermediate and deeps level of the field that he doesn't get enough respect for. On top of that, Ben Johnson was a top 3 play caller in football last year. Like I've said before, Shanahan, McDaniel, Ben Johnson, 3 best in football entering this year. I think Andy Reid is great historically, but I honestly felt those 3 were better than him last year. But I think the Lions are just very well balanced. They have good players at tight end, receiver, and running back. And yeah, they don't have 3 great receivers or anything like that, and they don't have an elite option at quarterback, but they have no holes. So I think the Lions are better than the Packers just because they've proven more. The Packers are a little bit more of a high upside. Let's say if my boy Christian Watson really breaks out, or even Reed breaks out in a big fashion, then potentially they could get there. But I think there's more questions about the Packers. Just the consistency of Jordan Love in comparison to a Jared Goff, who Love has more skill. Love has more upside, but I don't think he's as week to week consistent. At the same time, I feel like the offensive line is very, very good. Josh Jacobs is good. I do think that Matt LaFleur is a good coordinator, and I think that he does a great job with the play action stuff, and the run play action tied together, I think, is one of the main components that makes you love and fall in love with Jordan Love and the Packers offense. But I just think there's a little bit less of a known quantity here, like in terms of the Packers. So I would put the Lions above them, but I'd still have the Packers in my top 10 because I think they have excellent play calling and I think they've got weapons everywhere and they've got a very deep receiving core. I also really like their running game, so I'd still have them in my top 10. And honestly, I think that she has the top 10 mostly correct. I just think the some of the formation of it, I think the Rams, the Ravens, the Packers are just a little bit too high. I think the Chiefs might be a little bit too high as well. Miami is interesting because so much of their offense is thanks to play calling and speed. And I feel like a lot of people kind of like overcomplicate it when they think about it. Like, and I do that to myself. Like the offensive line is honestly the worst by far on this entire list. Like it's not even particularly close. The Dolphins offensive line is terrible, and Tua is not, my favorite quarterback in the league. But just the rhythm, the sequencing of the offense, the run game last year was extremely explosive. They did lose Connor Williams. They did lose Robert Hunt, which will hurt their running game. But Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, that is just such a great combo. They're so explosive. They make defenses play them differently. And then with that combination of home run hitters at running back, and then the play calling in terms of like the quick RPOs, the motion, all the different ways that McDaniel can attack you. I just feel like Miami has proven to be a top 5 or 6 offense in this league. So I do think they're a little bit underrated. Then you've got the Buffalo Bills, who I think are honestly a little bit overrated. They're basically Josh Allen at this point. I mean, they've got a lot of receivers that I want to believe are going to break out, but we just haven't quite seen it yet. Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox at tight end are a formidable duo there. I think Kincaid could really have a nice season. Shakir is a nice slot receiver, but I don't think he's much else. I do feel Curtis Samuel will have maybe a career year this year, and I'm intrigued by the rookie as well as I'm intrigued by the additions of even Chase Claypool and Mac Hollins as big targets for the outside to replace Gabe Davis. And then James Cook is really, really good. I don't think enough people give James Cook credit. The O-line, I think, is pretty good, but I think they played better than you would have thought last year. Like, they were better last year than I feel like they'll be this year, just because I think they're more of a product of overall maybe like, I don't know exactly, but they just played better as a cohesive whole than the individual parts, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong about that. The Bills, I think you could argue, are like 10 or 11 or 12, but at number 8, that feels a bit too high. Number 9, the Texans, I think, are severely underpriced by Mina here. I think the Texans just have too much skill talent. Their receivers are ludicrous. They've got a good, reliable tight end. I love Joe Mixon still. I think he's still extremely reliable and well-rounded running back and just clutch in all situations. CJ Stroud's a top 5 or 6 quarterback in the league, no matter how you slice it. His accuracy is the best, in my opinion, in football already. He is just an absolute dime waiting to happen. And the offensive line, I think a lot of people thought it was bad last year, but it was just injured. Like, they had so many injuries there. Laramie Tunzel is a stud. Shaq Mason is still very good. And I think they've got good play calling, but honestly, like, the run game will be better thanks to the O-line and Joe Mixon. The pass game will likely be more coordinated because I think Stroud's going to be more experienced and more calculated. And then the receiving core is just insane. So it's going to be very hard to play man coverage against them, making them very predictable, to see different coverages and zone coverages because teams are not going to play man against this team. So to me, like, the Texans at number 9 just feels too low. And we went over the Bengals already. So I don't hate this list whatsoever by Mina. I just feel like she kind of maybe missed on the order overall. You guys let me know in the comments if there's any offenses that did not make this list that maybe should have. Well, Dallas comes to mind just because Dallas was really good last year on offense. But I will say that the losses of Tyron Smith, Tyler Biadasz, and even Tony Pollard are a tad concerning. I think the O-line is a bit concerning this year for the first time in a long time. Dak having a career year last year, even with some kind of average play calling at times, was, I don't think, repeatable necessarily, but I think Dallas is probably just outside of this list. I think who else are really like flirting here? I think depending on Deshaun Watson, you might be able to see Cleveland maybe get to this territory, but I just don't believe enough in Deshaun Watson. Some people will hype up the Bears or the Colts with their young quarterbacks to get here, but I don't think the reliability or the consistency or the production's been there enough for those teams to put them in this conversation. Jacksonville's another where maybe they could make it inside the top 10 depending on Trevor Lawrence, the offensive line, but I wouldn't quite put them there either. So overall, I think, Arizona is maybe kind of a sneaky team to look forward to on offense. Arizona is pretty sneaky. Even Mina's Seahawks do have a lot of skill talent. I just don't really know about the offensive coordinator. Those are the ones that come to mind off the top of my head. I don't necessarily know. The Vikings just don't have a quarterback that I really trust. The Falcons maybe could be in the top 10 this year. I wouldn't be shocked by that either. And there's definitely going to be a team that maybe loses their quarterback or loses a significant amount of players where you just don't really know if they're going to finish top 10 or not. But it's hard to base your list based on that. So that is the offenses for Mina Kimes. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the football. Okay, Mina, let's see what you have for your top 10 defenses entering 2024. Let's go top to bottom. The Cleveland Browns, the number one defense statistically last season, is still Mina's number one defense entering 2024. I actually disagree with this pick. But honestly, I can't really argue too much with it, just because typically when we see regression from an offense or a defense, largely defenses regress a lot more at a much healthier rate than the offensive side of the football, because typically offense has more sticky pieces. Coordinator, quarterback, if you have those pieces together, you're going to be a good offense. Offensive lines, wide receivers, those are franchise players that stick around on football teams and franchises. Defensively, you need so many things to come together, including injuries, including a good pass rusher, a good corner. You need the specific things to fit your defense each and every season. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. For Cleveland, the one sticking point for them is that they really didn't lose anyone on their defense. They actually got a bit healthier this offseason. So you look at that defensive line, Myles Garrett obviously still there. Zadarius Smith, although he is getting older, still there. Dalvin Tomlinson, although he's still getting older, decided to stay, right? All these players across the defensive line, from Shelby Harris to a Crow, isn't it? Off the bench, right? One of the better kind of slept on third, fourth rotation rushers in football. A Maurice Hurst that was really good in a rotation role last year. They added, I believe it's Hall out of Ohio State, really good pass downs defensive tackle for them, I feel, out of the draft. One of my favorite explosive pass rushers from that interior. So the defensive line is really, really deep. But I will say that they're getting a lot older. Like guys like Shelby Harris, Dalvin Tomlinson, Zadarius Smith. Those are like 3 of the 4 starters. They're old. So if I'm worried about anything on Cleveland, I'm worried about age past the peak, past the prime, deterioration, especially at the defensive line spots. Linebacker, they did add another old man, Jordan Hicks, who's been a really good linebacker for a long time, has played under Schwartz in Philadelphia. Schwartz was the difference for this defense. I was saying for years how terrible. And NFL fans, BLV fans, guys that have been subscribed for years, they know how much I've been preaching. Like, Joe Woods is not it, especially running his whole ship. I now know that he is over in New Orleans and he's not really in charge of the defense because Dennis Allen is. He's basically like in name the defensive coordinator, but he was terrible for Cleveland. Like, his defense did not work. It did not maximize the talent they had. Schwartz gets there. They make them more aggressive, better man coverage team, more man coverage team, and using Myles Garrett better, doing so many different things at a better level. The run defense was a lot better. It just made no sense over the years why Cleveland's defense was not playing at a top 5, top 10 level. Last year, they end up being an epic unit, and I kind of projected that last year. This year, I do feel like they're going to maybe fall a little bit. They're still going to be a great defense because they still have pretty much the entire core in there. JOK is still there. Their safeties, Thornhill and Delpit, are still there. They don't have bad safety depth. The corner position, I like all 3 of their corners, especially Ward and Emerson. But, They've got Newsome as well. Like, they don't really have any holes, but I would say linebackers are average. I would say the defensive line is a little bit old, and I do feel like the way they play is very hit and miss because they play so much man coverage, because they like to be aggressive. They can dominate games, but they can also be torched in other games, as we saw throughout the last half of the season, especially in some of their road matchups. So I think Cleveland is going to be a little bit more up and down than last year, not as dominant as last year, but I still feel they're going to be very good. At number 2, the New York Jets, I probably would say, although I've not ranked my defenses yet, I would say that the Jets would probably be my number 1, just because I love the pieces they have. I love the talent they have. I love their combination of big people on the inside, good pass rush, good linebackers, great corners. I just feel like they have what it takes to be matchup proof in the NFL right now. They're solid against the run. I wouldn't say they're dominant, but they're very solid. You can't just run on them all day. They've got very good corners to where they can play enough different coverages, but also like they can lean into certain bread and butter coverages and concepts because they're just so good at the corner positions. And then they've got an excellent pass rush, and they just sprinkle in enough of a blitzing package where they can catch you. So, and I love the speed at linebacker. So I think what makes it work is Quinnen Williams in the middle is one of the most dominant players at his position in the NFL. You add Hassan Reddick, who might be a little bit less of a pass rusher at this point than Huff, who they basically alternated, basically traded, swapped those players, Reddick and Huff. But Reddick comes in, I think he's a more steady every down player than Huff is. He's more of a rotation pass rusher now for the Eagles. But Reddick will help. I think Johnson is going to be a big-time baller this year. He had a great year last year, but I expect another rise in play this year. I think he's an excellent player in all phases. I think that some of their depth is pretty solid as well. They've got like numerous first-round picks, Will McDonald being one of them, Solomon Thomas being one of them, Javon Kinlaw being another one of them. Across their defensive line, I think they have enough defensive tackle depth. I love the speed at linebacker with Quincy Williams and CJ Mosley. Might be the best combo at linebacker in football. Maybe not even might. They probably are the best combo, especially with Dre Greenlaw being injured for the 49ers right now. And they do everything at a high level. Their corners can play man. They can play zone. Reed and Sauce are a great combo. And even Carter is slept on at the nickel spot. I think the Jets are just very well-rounded, and they're everything I look for in a modern defense. They don't really blitz a lot, but they blitz just a little, and they rely on their four-man rush, which is really effective. They fly around. They're fast. They're physical. I love the way the Jets play. They would probably be my number 1, but we'll see once I get to actually ranking my defenses. I really study it where I would rank them, but number 2 is fair. Number 3, the Dallas Cowboys. I honestly don't know if I'd have the Cowboys on my list. And that's a lot to do with, well, you go from Dan Quinn to Mike Zimmer. And Mike Zimmer is a great defensive coach. He has been for a lot of years, but he's been out of football for a couple seasons. So there are major question marks about his ability to adapt to the modern NFL, at least in my opinion. He hasn't been out too long, but it's been enough for me to question it. Dan Quinn did an excellent job. And the reason I say, like, I think they'll miss him a little bit is I really liked his pass defense. I felt like he always brought the bread and butter of man coverage, but at the same, which I'm a huge fan of man coverage in general. Secondly, I feel like he had enough creativity up front to mix it up, and then he got the best out of their best players. It felt like every year he put Parsons in the right spots, Diggs in the right spots when he was playing. It felt like, DeMarcus Lawrence, all these guys, they were always in a position to succeed. He elevated some of the subpar talent. He got away with maybe an underwhelming safety and linebacking kind of positions where he elevated the safety play at that team and that defense and that scheme, in my opinion. So I kind of feel like Quinn was really, really good. As soon as he got there and Parsons got there at the same time, that defense instantly elevated to an entirely different level where previously they were terrible. So I think Quinn is a loss. I think that Gilmore is a loss that not many people are talking about. I understand that Diggs takes his spot technically, But I still feel like if you do lose Diggs or you do lose Bland, by the way, I think Bland's a little bit overrated. I'm just going to say that. I do feel like he's kind of a ball hawk. He's not the most ideal shutdown corner, but I do feel like both of those guys, having them both on the defense, Diggs and Bland, both the ball production is out of this world. So that's where I get to Dallas and I say, like, they're a very flashy defense. They're a defense that could be hit and miss, but I am very concerned about linebacker. I'm concerned about size in the interior. I'm concerned about run defense. And I'm concerned about, changing coordinators. And then even the depth, like guys like, is it Jaron Curse, the safety, who's been a really good player for them for a number of years. Gilmore, who was there. Some of the defensive linemen like Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler, these guys that left, that were just important. Jonathan Hankins, important depth pieces. Leighton Vander Esch at linebacker, important core fundamental pieces to the defense, I think is enough to slip. Defense is one of those things where the third pass rusher, like Dorrance Armstrong, is a big deal. The third safety is a big deal. The third corner is a big deal because a lot of deterioration and injuries happen throughout the year. So have they replenished the defensive line enough? Possibly. I think they made a couple nice draft picks and things like that, but they didn't really bring in a lot of veteran talent, Eric Kendricks being the only one, and I'm not a huge fan of Eric Kendricks at this point in his career. I understand the attachment to Zimmer there to run his stuff and run his scheme, but I'm not a huge fan of Kendricks. So... And I kind of wonder, how that's going to look. I think they could finish top 10. I won't deny that because I think they have a good enough pass rush. I think they have good enough corners to be a top 10 defense. But top 3, I just don't see the well-balanced unit. And I see too many fatal flaws that could ultimately cost them as a top 3 defense. At number 4, the 49ers. I'm actually lower on the 49ers defense than most people. And I think that's a lot to do with last season and having, really followed this team for the last few years. I'm basically an honorary Niners fan, right? So I watch more Niners than a majority of people. I try to watch everybody, but Niners I really study, really pay attention to, I'm a fan of the team. The Niners defense last year was not that good. Right, their finish was not as good. Their finish, their ranking, their stats were not as good as the actual defense. We saw that in the playoffs. The Packers, the Lions games, they got shredded. For a majority of the games, they made timely plays that were key to winning, but they also got shredded. They almost reminded me of the 2010s, early 2010 Patriot defenses where timely but not effective, not very good. Right, Super Bowl, second half was a disaster. First half was fantastic. I do think they'll be better than last year just because I think they've got more depth in the secondary, and I think they've got probably just as good of a defensive line, if not better, and they've got much better coaching. I think that Daniel Sorensen, is it Daniel Sorensen? That's the safety. What is it? Sorensen. I don't remember his first name. Sorensen has been elevated from within as a defensive back coach. He worked in Seattle previously. He has a lineage of this Pete Carroll, Robert Saleh, this system that D'Amico Ryans and these guys have been running. So it's not like Steve Wilkes where he tried to run his own stuff and it didn't really work. He tried to run more man coverage. He tried to blitz more. It didn't really work. It didn't jive with the players. It didn't operate well. So, and there was no real connection from the players and the leaders like Nick Bosa and Fred Warner to Steve Wilkes. And that kind of messed everything up. On top of that, the run defense and just a lack of understanding of Steve Wilkes, it really felt like, and the actual core system of the wide 9, I felt like it really deteriorated. Now, I do feel like we could honestly see Brandon Staley add some influence to this defense where perhaps they run a little bit more 5-man front defenses. Maybe they even mix in a little bit of 3-4 stuff. Maybe they mix in, some 5-man defensive fronts and things like that to help them against the run. And I always felt like that was kind of their best look went on early downs to take away the run. But the 49ers, I think their secondary will be better because Hufanga will be back. I think Brown and just being a regular starter, Jair Brown, is going to add speed, youth, athleticism to the secondary that was missing last year with Gibson and Logan Ryan and these guys playing in there. I feel like Ronaldo, I don't know, Green from FSU he was a good corner out of the draft. He was actually really good in man coverage. I'm intrigued to see. He has a very similar Charvarius Ward type skill set where he's a bigger corner. He's good in press coverage. I could see him fitting in their quarters looks, in their man looks. I think he'll complement Charvarius Ward really well. They're very similar that way. So I'm really looking forward to him. But even Isaac Yiadom out of New Orleans last year, he played really well for the Saints. I wouldn't be surprised if he played on the outside a little bit. So they've got some extra cornerback depth on top of still having Thomas, obviously Lenore at the nickel spot where he can stay at the nickel spot. Ward is still playing at an elite level. You know, Hufanga running around and flying around is going to change the defense, the dynamic of the tackling, the physicality. Devondre Campbell as a depth linebacker upgrades that position. He'll be starting until Dre Greenlaw comes back, but once you get Greenlaw back into that fold, you know, the guys behind him were certainly not Al Shire, which ultimately hurt them in the Super Bowl, right? But Campbell, to me, is an upgrade over guys like Burks that was playing in there in the Super Bowl. I think Armstead is overrated at this point because he's been injured a lot, and he was not the same player in the playoffs. Malik Collins is an underrated pickup for the 49ers. I've always liked Malik Collins. I thought he played well in Houston. And he's a good fit, in my opinion, for the 49ers defense. And then you look at, okay, so Collins on the inside. Floyd, I think, is an upgrade overall over Chase Young just from a consistency and a health standpoint. Floyd rarely gets injured. Floyd is like 9.5, 10 sacks a year. Chase Young is more erratic, especially in run defense. The effort was kind of questionable at times. Nick Bosa is a stud. Fred Warner is a stud. I like a lot of the defense. I actually think they'll be better than last year. But I was really down on their defense by the end of the year. So I could see them still finishing around 5, 6, 7. But I kind of think I would rank them around 7 to 10 if it was me. Just because I think that their scheme, until proven otherwise, is a little bit vanilla for my liking. And they've lost the X-Factor coordinator like DeMeco Ryans that I think made them the best defense in football, you know, a couple of years ago. So plus like Fred Warner, Charvarius Ward, some of their pieces are a little bit older. They don't quite have, you know, they still got Hargrave and stuff. But again, it just feels like the peak of that defense maybe has passed us by, where they're more of an offensive team, but they're still a very good defense with a lot of very good players. So again, I'm really nitpicking with the 49ers, but it was a lot about like their run defense last year, the tackling last year. A lot of these things drove me nuts watching them. So, and it just felt like they were out-prepared, out-schemed, like 90% of the big games they played last year. So the 49ers, to me, I can get just from a talent basis why they'd be top 5, but I'd rather have a more schematically sound defense be above them, like the New England Patriots are at number 5. And I appreciate Mina putting my Patriots in her top 5 because I think the Patriots are by far the most underrated defense in the NFL, and therefore they are an underrated team to some degree. Now, I don't think the offense is very good, but I think the defense is so good that it makes them a respectable team. The Patriots had the number 1 defense in the NFL from weeks 10 to 18, according to EPA. And I heard Mina bring up the other statistics like starting field position, where they were the worst in the NFL, man games lost, you know, players injured, right? On the defensive side was the worst in the NFL for the Patriots. They lost their 2 best defensive players, at least most talented defensive players, in Matt Judon and Christian Gonzalez at 2 fundamental huge positions, edge rusher and corner, right? So, and they still were the number 1 defense in the last 9 games of the year, and they had the number 2 run defense in the NFL, and they didn't really lose anybody. So if anything, you know, you get Judon, you get Gonzalez, you get Marcus Jones back, who I think is going to develop into a really good nickel player because of his skill set as a returner and a quick, agile player. He can really match up with a lot of guys. He was actually really good in his rookie year on the outside. You might recall a pick 6 he had against the Bengals. But yeah, I feel like the Patriots defense might be the best in football. Like really, truly. They don't have a ton of superstars that everybody knows, but they have probably more good players on defense than really anybody in the league. Like Judon is a great player. Josh Uche in a pass rushing role is a very good player. He had 12 sacks 2 years ago. Christian Barmore is a very good D tackle. Devon Godshaw is a very good nose tackle who's a good run stuffer. The reason they were second best in run defense. Jawan Bentley and Tavai are a very good linebacker combo, especially in this system. Big linebackers, right? They've got younger guys like Marte Mapu who are ready to rise up. Jonathan Jones has been one of the most underrated corners, maybe the most underrated corner for like 10 years now. Gonzalez I brought up, Marcus Jones I brought up. They've got guys in the mix like Austin, who played well at the end of last year. Nobody knows who that is. Jabril Peppers, Kyle Duggar. These guys are studs in the back end of the safety position. Like, Anthony Jennings is a good player. Like, they've got so many good players. Dietrich Wise is a good player. They've got so much depth on this defense. It's really ludicrous how much depth they have. So, and they're good in all fronts. They can play all coverages, all fronts. Like, they could play a 4-man front. They could play a 3-man front. They can blitz. They can cover. They can 4-man rush you with Uche and Judon and Barmore with 3-man really getting after it. That 4-man rush, just sending 4 with Judon, Uche, Barmore, and Wise and Keon White is like a really good pass rush. So, yeah, I just feel like the Patriots are super slept on as a defense. I definitely have them in my top 3. I think they're really that good. The Chiefs, I think I'd have a little bit higher as well. The only thing I'm hesitant about with the Chiefs is L'Jarius Sneed's departure. Now that L'Jarius Sneed is gone, that fundamentally changes the strength of the Chiefs in the final 2 games of last year, where the Chiefs basically said, in order for us to stop the run, because remember, before the Baltimore game and the Super Bowl against the Niners and the Ravens, everyone was screaming at the top of their lungs. They were like, okay, this defense can't stop the run. Like, they're like 31st or 32nd in success rate against the run. You've got to run it against the Chiefs. But what did Spags say? He said, we're going to load the box and we're going to play man coverage. And with L'Jarius Sneed and Trent McDuffie, you could get away with that. But without L'Jarius Sneed, who is probably the best man-to-man corner in the NFL last year, you can't really get away with the same tactic. So it changes the entire philosophy of the defense, which I'm worried about. But at the same time, I do believe that Williams is a good football player and Watson is a good football player. I don't think they're L'Jarius Sneed, but I think they're good. I also think that Connor is pretty interesting at safety. I like getting Cook back at the safety spot. Mike Edwards is a bit of a loss in my opinion. I liked his role in the defense. I also feel like Willie Gay is a bit of a loss in the defense, but again, they've got really good linebackers. Like Leo Chanel is a sledgehammer. Drew Tranquil is a really talented all-around player. And Nick Bolton is a stud. Chris Jones is still a stud. You do worry about him getting a little bit fat and happy with the contract, but the D-line isn't a phenomenal unit, but it's very solid. Karlaftis, Mike Dana, these guys are solid players. I don't love the D-line. Like, the 4-man rush isn't great. They like to blitz a lot when they get their chance, and that's where they load up their talent in the back end. Justin Reed is a really good kind of like man coverage safety as well. So, yeah, the Chiefs are a really good unit. I just love Spags. I love his approach. I love his philosophy. He always is good at figuring out what his defense does well, and he adjusts to that, to stop his opponent. Baltimore is a defense that, at number 7 for Mina, was the best defense by the end of the year in the NFL. It was them or the Chiefs, right? And the Ravens were number 1 in a lot of different categories, as well as Cleveland. And Baltimore really benefited from coaching, I feel like, more than almost any unit in the league, with Mike Macdonald, who, in my opinion, is the young, bright defensive mind in football. He's like the Shanahan or the McVay of defense. And now he leaves to Seattle, which low-key might be one of the 10 best defenses this year, Seattle. I'm actually surprised Mina didn't talk about Seattle, but I'm excited for Seattle's defense. Now, in terms of Baltimore, they just don't have the talent that I feel like the Chiefs, the Patriots, the Niners, the Jets, or the Browns have. But they do have enough talent for them to be a top 10 defense, right? They do have the core, the spine of the defense is very strong. Roquan is the best linebacker in the NFL. Justin Madubuike is an excellent player. And, Marlon Humphrey, depending on where you put him, nickel or outside, is still good, although probably not elite anymore. Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton are arguably the best safety duo in football. Hamilton usually plays a lot of nickel, though. The outside perimeter corners, I like the rookie they got out of Clemson. I'm a big fan of his. We'll see how much he works out this year. Brandon Stevens is a solid player. I don't love the edge rush, and I don't love the pass rush without blitzing in general. So I don't love Oweh and Kyle Van Noy as primary pass rushers. I don't think Broderick Washington or Michael Pierce are bringing anything as pass rushers. So that means Justin Madubuike is the lone threat as a top-notch pass rusher. Like I just talked about, with the Chiefs, you've got Chris Jones, who's a next-level pass rusher. And then you've also got, like, Dana and Karlaftis who can get there, right? They can get there. The Patriots have a much better pass rush. The Niners have a much better pass rush. The Dallas Cowboys obviously have a much better pass rush. The Jets have a much better pass rush. The Browns do. So, like, the Ravens are really reliant on scheme, coverage, confusion, different pressure packages, which is a lot of coaching. So that's what I'm scared about with the Ravens. But I still think that they have enough studs to be top 10. I just have them, around that 7 to 10. I think is very fair for Mina. Now, in terms of number 8 for Pittsburgh, I actually think the Pittsburgh Steelers are a top 10 defense as well. So I really like this inclusion here. I think first of all, Mike Tomlin usually has good defenses. Secondly, they've got a really good pass rush. Cam Hayward should be healthier this year. I still think he can play. TJ Watt is arguably the best defensive player in this sport. And then you have on the other side, Highsmith has developed each and every year, has gotten better. And then, Benton has developed into a pretty good player. Ogunjobi, I believe, is still there. A pretty good defensive line. I think they're very deep. The linebacker position is kind of the area where I'm very excited because they added Patrick Queen, which adds athleticism, adds range, adds coverage ability to a defense that desperately needed it in the middle of the defense. You combine Queen in the middle with Fitzpatrick in the middle, and that is extremely exciting. The corner position is pretty lacking. Like, can Dante Jackson help them with speed? Maybe. Obviously, you've got Porter in year 2. He should be a pretty darn good player in year 2 after a good rookie season. So I think they just have more answers than previously. They have actually a good perimeter corner. They have a really good safety in the back end with Fitzpatrick. They have a couple weak spots, but they're better at linebacker. They're deeper at defensive line. They've got TJ Watt. There's a lot of studs. So the Steelers, I do think, are a top 10 defense. The Texans at number 9, I think I agree with that. Now, I think the Texans, D'Amico Ryans is a huge element here. He's a great play caller. He's a very timely blitzer, and he always seems to get energy out of this defense. They were an excellent run defense last year, but I think their pass rush is going to be way more dynamic. Danielle Hunter is a specimen. Danico Autry is really going to help them in terms of their hybrid fronts of putting him in the inside, which is really going to be effective, and Will Anderson is a stud too. And so, they don't have a stud defensive tackle, but they have other really, really good players up there. Corner, I think that they're deeper and better. Stingley is obviously going to be a huge element there as their number 1 corner. I think he played really well when he played last year. I like the addition of the busts, so to speak, like Okudah and Henderson. If one of them can work out, Lassiter was drafted. Miles Bryant as a zone nickel corner is really interesting because he was solid in New England in that role. Safeties, Jimmy Ward and Petrie, are very solid, and the depth is experienced, which I like. I like how Nick Caserio, even in the positions like safety and corner, where they're not stacked in terms of starters, they have a lot of depth to choose from and a lot of different roles. So that's interesting. A lot of different types of players. So D'Amico can choose the types that he likes. I also think Al-Shaair is an upgrade at linebacker, along with Christian Harris, who I think is one of the more underrated linebackers in the NFL. So I think that the Texans do belong in this range. The Bills are the one unit that I could honestly say, them and the Cowboys for me are the 2 units I look at on this list and I say, I'm not sure they'll be in my top 10. The Bills are very well coached every year with Sean McDermott. Matt Milano does come back. But I think the pass rush is good, but not great. Like Rousseau, Oliver, Daquan Jones, and AJ Epinesa. It's solid. It's good. It's not great. They don't have a lot of depth at edge compared to recent years. Can Von Miller get something going once again? I don't know. Maybe he's washed. Linebackers are always solid there. Safeties, I think, are younger, faster, more athletic, but less experienced. Corners, I think, are one of the better units in the league. But honestly, I do think off the top, they'll probably be a better defense than the Bills. Right, so just going through the league, I do think Seattle, I brought them up, is one of those units I might say projection-wise could be there. I think the Eagles have enough talent, but I'm not sure it all comes together. So I wouldn't 100% say the Eagles. I would say that in the NFC South, the Bucs and the Saints are always formidable defenses. I would say that in the North, Chicago is solid. Detroit is a defense that I think is going to get a lot better this year. Green Bay could also get a lot better on defense, and Minnesota was sneaky good last year. And then in the AFC North, I think there's all 3 out of 4. The Bengals, I could see as a top 15 defense, but probably not top 10. The Dolphins, they've got talent, but I don't think it will be consistent. The Raiders are sneaky pretty good on defense. And that's probably it. I don't think the Colts, just because the secondary, but they do have a very good pass rush. The Jags, again, like kind of inconsistent. So I would say, honestly, if I were to put one in there, I might go Seattle. But I do feel like there's a lot of other defenses out there that you could argue toe-to-toe with the Bills. But overall, I like the defensive list. I just, again, maneuver some of the names. I'd probably have the Jets at number 1. I'd probably have the Patriots in there, the Chiefs in the top 4 with the Browns as well. And then after that, I think it's a bit of a toss-up between the Niners, the Steelers, and the Texans. And then after, I'd have the Cowboys, the Bills, and the rest of the teams. But that's how I see it. Let me know how you see it, guys, in the comments. If you enjoyed, Gronk spiked the like button. At some point, I will be doing my rankings for the offenses and the defenses in the NFL this year. I know I'm doing it for Bleacher Report, and I'll be posting my top 32 offenses and defenses once I'm done on the Bleacher Report, and we'll bring all my rankings to the Bottom Line View. If you're wondering, where are your rankings at, Mitch? They're coming in July, guys, so just be patient. We'll see you soon. All right, peace.